Mentors podcast will begin in 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Welcome once again, ladies and gentlemen, to our show for round 4 of the NRL season. Obviously, round 3 has just been put to bed, and it was a fantastic round with some great results for both Cronulla and the Titans, which, of course, here at the NRL DT podcast, the only ones that Banksy and I care about. And Melbourne managed to put away the Bulldogs, which is going to thrill our special guest, Adrian Buttery. And he will be here to have a chat with us and a bit of an interview a little bit later on his team for this year. He's doing quite well in the top 200, and looks like he might actually have hit the nail on the head for once this year. We'll also go in and have a look at the week that was. We'll have a look at a few other bits and pieces. An interesting topic on the soapbox, of course, because we've got Billy Slater's impersonation of Bruce Lee, and we'll be having a chat about Richie Faoso's shoulder charge on Ashley Harrison. So before we get into it, welcome Banksy, and of course, welcome Butters.
Thanks, mate. Good to be here.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jay.
Always a pleasure to have you here, Banksy, and I know that you and I are going to definitely go at it sort of on the soapbox there, taking different stances. But Butters, mate, first time. It's good to pop your cherry. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Alrighty, so let's have a look at the week that was, boys. We'll recap some results just really quickly in case you have been living under a rock. Of course, as soon as I don't click the wrong thing on NRL.com, we'll have all the results up. Starting on our Thursday night matchup, the Storm held off a late charge from the Bulldogs to put them down 22-18. And, of course, that's the game that started the round off with a fair bit of controversy with Billy Slater's kick. Moving on to Friday, West Tigers down to Eels, and the Eels really put in a lacklustre performance. Titans held on to beat a fast-finishing Seagulls with just 15 men at the end of the game there, 16-14. Roosters put the Broncos to the sword, 8-0 in one of the lowest scoring games we've seen in a very long time. The Sharks pummeled the Warriors, who've got to be favourites for a wooden spoon now. And Panthers tried to come back and fought spiritedly against a Rabbitohs team that sort of clocked off between the half-time mark and the 60-minute mark before they came back and sealed the deal. Raiders continued the Dragons' misery down in Canberra, beating them 30-17. And, of course, the Knights were the surprise packet for me. I don't know about you boys. Did you see the Knights upping the Cowboys 34-6?
I saw them putting in a very impressive performance. I thought they were very, very good round 1. I thought they may have come in a little bit overconfident round 2 against Manly, and I think they well and truly embarrassed themselves against Manly. I think Bennett would have been completely stuck into them all week long, and I was, in all honesty, expecting them to come out really fired up with their home crowd behind them, and really showing their coach that they had something to believe in.
How about you, Banksy? I mean, did you see that one coming, mate? 34-6?
I did not see the Knights even winning that match. I thought the Cowboys would have been too good. I definitely didn't see that sort of margin. But obviously the Cowboys didn't play well enough.
Yeah, look, to be honest with you, I always had it in the back of my mind that a Bennett side doesn't ever get beaten by a huge margin 2 weeks in a row. You know, Bennett would have... he would have had those guys looking down at their feet all week and really questioning what it was that they should have been doing and making sure that they came out and did it on Monday night. I think they got a real lesson at the hands of Manly. You know, Manly in round 2 just brutalised them. Manly were very physical up front. They were very, very strong. And, I think they bruised the Knights into submission very early on in the piece, and that set the flow for the match. The Knights came out against the Cowboys and took a leaf out of Manly's book and were just very physical, very fast all night. You know, they played 80 minutes of fast-running football. And I honestly don't believe the Cowboys were ready for it. They looked like they were flat on their heels most of the night.
I think that's a pretty good assessment, mate.
And to be honest with you, I tipped the Cowboys. I really thought the Cowboys were going to get home. And in fact, I had the Cowboys winning by 4.5 or more in my multi-bet. So I was a bit disappointed by that one, but that's all right. These things happen in footy. Who are the standouts this week, guys, for you? Banks, I'll start with you. I'll come to you in a sec, Butters. From a DT perspective, who are the players that sort of, really stood out and perhaps lived up to expectation finally, or were exceeding expectation and were continuing on a golden run?
Well, I had a few players in my team, which my two main stalwarts are Cameron Smith and Daly Cherry-Evans. They once again fired for me, so I was very pleased with that. Sonny Bill finally lived up to the hype for my team. Merrin pumped out an amazing 66 points in the nation's capital. Manor finally picked up some good points as well, which I'm very pleased with. You got Jacob Loco, the first time I've risked him in my team this year. He pumps out a 49 for me. I'm very happy with that. Other than that, Inglis again pumping out another 60 for me. I'll have that one, thank you. Was disappointed though. He was on 55 at half time.
Yeah, he clocked off, mate. The Rabbitohs clocked off. And Butters, mate, who were the standouts for you DT wise? Who sort of just pulled it out?
Well, mate, there've been a lot that have already been mentioned. Anyone that got caught in the trap of, look, I've seen so much really dumb DT talk on various pages regarding two players over the last week. Cameron Smith, Robbie Farah. Bottom line, Scott Moore, I'm going to stand by it, please. His round one score, 38, sucked everybody in. It's very, very hard working the Super League stats, but the Super League stats that I worked with, they were kind of telling me this guy's a part-time Michael Ennis, and I think round 2 and round 3 have pretty much shown we're looking at a part-time Michael Ennis. So to all the guys that jumped on the Scott Moore bandwagon, okay, well, you needed to jump off pretty quick, and that's all right. So it's really hard looking at a Super League player. The stats are really hard to get hold of. You're really kind of trying to, you're working with very difficult figures there. That's fine. And most people are just going off the banter going around on Facebook as well, not even looking at stats. Making that mistake, no problem. Then going to, okay, well, Farah's a real deal this year. I'm going to save myself bucks and dump Cameron Smith and buy Farah. Sorry, you've really made a mistake. The answer to all this is Smith and Farah, not one or the other.
Yeah,
in terms of jumping around from going from one captain choice to the other, well, we all know from years gone by that's what happened. The golden rule, the number one rule of DT Fight Club is buy Cameron Smith, captain Cameron Smith, never doubt Cameron Smith. It's really simple. The only time you would ever think about not captaining Cameron Smith would be is a round following Origin, if you've got a massive gun that you can rely on. And at the moment, the only massive gun you can rely, well, we're not even in that situation anyway.
Yeah, that's right. But Daly Cherry-Evans would be the only one that immediately jumps out at me as potential other captain material. Farah, I must admit, I did jump on him as captain last week or this week just gone and the week before, and he did well for me. Just to paint a picture, I know there's a lot of people out there who have been hesitant on Farah after last year's performance, and particularly the year before's. And I want to point out that, look, going into the last couple of seasons, Farah has had an osteopubitis injury. Now, osteopubitis is a very nasty sort of gripey injury. It's typically in your hip bone, and it's kind of like it's almost like an arthritic type of injury. It's not something that can really be cured. They can operate, they can get in there and they can clean it up, but it's not going to sort of be cured for the rest of your life. Not like where you reset a bone or something like that. So Farah didn't have the surgery last year when he probably should have. As a result, he was playing in pain for the vast majority of the year. It was only towards the end of the year that we started to see him hitting the form that we've always expected, of Robbie Farah. And that puts him in that same sort of category as Cameron Smith when you're talking about your DT guns and hookers. During the off-season, he had that surgery. He had plenty of time to recover and has done so, and we're now seeing the results. He's averaging 69.33. And that's, because you've got a bloke who is more determined than ever to get an Origin spot. He's just signed for life with the Tigers, and he wants to show he's worth it. And he plays DT himself. He knows, and he actually made an apology last year to his DT fans for his subpar performance and said, I will be better, I will get better. And this is what we're seeing now from Robbie Farah in 2013.
There's another thing there that hasn't been mentioned yet as well. The osteopubitis one thing. The last 2 years of Robbie Farah's life have been an extremely difficult personal time for him.
Yeah,
and there
absolutely.
is no doubt that his attention would have been very much split between those personal issues to do with his mother's health and his football.
Yeah.
You know, it was a very sad time during last season when Robbie's mum passed away. But you know, one of the harsh realities of that is in that you get that kind of closure, and that, you know, you can kind of move on. And you know, I really think that league is a massive part of Robbie's life.
Yeah.
And you know, those hard times, it's a very sad ending. Those hard times are over, and his focus now will be completely, totally on his footy.
Oh, absolutely, and I think that's exactly what we're seeing in the scores there. But you know, bring it back to that key point. You know, the right decision when it comes to your hookers is Cameron Smith and Robbie Farah. It's not one or the other. You know, there is daylight. There is an age between Robbie Farah and the next best hooker, and that shows in the price. I think there's about $100,000 price difference between Robbie Farah and the next best hooker as well. And you know, if you're going to spend $1 million on two players, you spend it on Cameron Smith and Robbie Farah. There's no safer bet in the game for that $1 million, and it's going to repay you in spades throughout the year. Your only issue is going to be during that Origin period, where they're probably going to both be Origin hookers. But you know, at the end of the day, we all have problems during Origin period. Nobody is going to have Cameron Smith and Robbie Farah during that Origin period, so it's not a huge. Well, I'll have both, but what I'm saying is no one will have points.
Won't be available. I'll cop it.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. You know, no one's going to be scoring those points from Robbie Farah and Cameron Smith. And I dare say, you look at the top 10 teams right now after round 3, and the vast majority of them have Robbie Farah and Cameron Smith. And in fact, the vast majority of them, Robbie Farah and Cameron Smith, are the only major guns that those blokes have. A couple will have Inglis, a couple might have Daly Cherry Evans. There's a hell of a lot of value in those teams. Most have Inglis. So there you go. Robbie Farah, Cameron Smith, and Greg Inglis are the main 3 standouts out of your top 10 teams. You know,
man, a lot of those teams, I'm pretty sure, a couple of weeks ago had Cameron Smith and Scott Moore.
Oh, quite possibly.
I think there've been a lot of teams up there that did whatever trades they need to do to get Smith Farah, but I've quite a few teams up there I'm pretty sure actually started off with Cameron Smith and Scott Moore and rectified it.
I wouldn't be surprised, and you know, that's the rectification they need to do. And look, to be honest with you, you guys have covered most of the players that sort of jumped out DT-wise this week. Look,
there's a couple of others.
Oh, there are.
Really quickly. I've come out and slammed this player. I didn't slam him in such a way that said it will never happen. I slammed him in such a way of saying, you know, I'm not really impressed with the way he's gone about this, and I want to see points on the board before I'm going to fork out the dollars. So hats off to Sonny Bill Williams.
Yeah.
47, 33 round 2, looked a bit lackluster, played 80 minutes in the back row last week, 59 points. Okay, I'm now a believer. And I knew that I always never doubted he'd come good at some point. It was just a matter of how quickly he can come through. But, you know, okay, he's making it happen. He's making it happen quick. Fair enough.
Yeah. Oh, I think the best is yet to come from Sonny Bill too. You know, that 59, that was in a huge game, you know, a very low-scoring game against the Broncos. And you know, he pumped out a lot of tackles. He set up a try and that sort of thing. But I honestly think that, set up a line break, not a try. But I think the best is yet to come from Sonny Bill. You know, everything you hear from him, everything like that is, he's not done yet with himself. He's still not happy with where he's at. He's happy that he's improving, but he knows there's more to come from him. And look, I'm turning into a believer. I never liked what he did. I never liked the way he did it and all that sort of stuff. But as far as a professional footballer goes, back in the NRL, look, I don't know if the NRL needs to offer him face of the game or no, that's probably a curse. No, the NRL needs to do something to make sure that he never leaves the NRL until the day he retires. And if that means that they're paying him underhandedly a back-end deal or whatever, I honestly don't care. This guy, and you see it in the rest of the Roosters squad, they're benefiting from having Sonny Bill around there. They're seeing that professionalism in him and the way that he works, the way he goes about his work, and is constantly looking to improve. And I think that can only be good for our game. Channel 9 needs to lay off the whole let's see what the thoughts of Sonny Bill are, though. I think that's just a load of crap.
Yeah. The other player that I think is probably going very well under the radar at the moment that people should be really having a good look at, and especially after his performance last week against Newcastle, Anthony Watmow.
Yeah.
43 round 1, 78 round 2, 49 round 3. His price rise this week must have been over 30k.
It was 31,900. It was
31,000. My estimate was 33,500. I haven't had time to go back and kind of and tweak all those yet, but yeah. The way he was running through the line, his speed, his fitness, just everything, even though he's playing with an injury, he's certainly a player capable of being a real mover and shaker this year, and he's showing it early.
Yeah, look, the only asterisk that I would put on that is Glenn Stewart's due back in a couple of rounds' time, and that may impact
Watmow plays 80 minutes. He plays 80 minutes anyway.
Well, with Glenn Stewart coming back, Watmow may not, and they may do some rotation there. You got to keep in mind too, they have some pretty good forward depth. You look at the guys who've come in to fill the gap. You're looking at sort of Langi Setu. You got Richie Faoso. Joe Gallival, there's some guys there who they've all stepped up and are filling that gap that has been left by Glenn Stewart. I mean, nobody expected Manly to put Newcastle to the sword 34-zip. I mean, we all expected Manly to put them to the sword, but we didn't expect it to be like that. And that's coming off the back of their forwards. Their forwards are brutal. And look, speaking of one forward, and I've kept this guy under wraps, and not mentioned him on the show before. It's starting to sneak out now, so I'm going to claim the kudos and all the rest of it.
Well, I'm on this train with you as well, mate.
Yeah,
He's already gone up in price by about 35k, so,
absolutely. Fair enough. Brenton BJ Lawrence, he's one of our favourite players from when he was at the Titans. We loved him. We were sorry to see him go, but we knew that he had to go somewhere to get his shot because of the depth of the Titans forward pack. He was just never going to get a starting run-on shot. He goes to Manly, Jason King injured and that sort of thing. He starts the season. This guy is averaging 47.67 as a front row forward. Now that's great, for 252,000 starting. He's gone up to 287,600. His break even this week is 5.
-3. Sorry, 6. I've got it at 6. So it's been down to 5, is it?
Yep. Yeah, I've got it at 5 on assistant coach. He's due, if he makes his predicted score, which is only 41, 23,900 is his projected increase. Now, the thing about this guy, this is one of the reasons, I picked him early. I had him in my squad from day dot. I was never getting off him as soon as I knew he was starting. It was because BJ's points per minute, his work rate, is second to none. You will be hard-pressed to find another player who scores as quickly and as frequently as Brenton Lawrence. Last year for the Titans, he played 9 games at an average of 1.14 points per minute, and he only averaged about 35 minutes a game. This year, he's averaging slightly over 40 for Manly, and he's averaging 47.67 points per game. The guy is phenomenal. He's in everything, loves, defending up the middle, and rumour has it, he beat Matty Ballin on the beat test in pre-season fitness training. Matty Ballin is one of the fittest players, bar none, in the NRL, and BJ Lawrence put him to the sword. And
along with Kane Lawton.
So, I'm on him, I'm loving him, and I if he keeps this up, I cannot see me getting off him this year. I think he's going to be a stalwart of my front row lineup. And I'll bring in Trent Merrin to beef it up on the other side. in a couple of rounds' time. But Brenton Lawrence, if you're not on him, you know what I'm about to say next. Give yourself an uppercut. The kid's just too good not to have him on your side.
Funny enough, he's been probably one of the most valuable buys that you could have got for the season, and he's been one of the most missed.
Yeah.
I don't know what the figures show up on DT now that lockout's finished, but coming into this week,
1.9% of teams.
1.31%.
Oh, there you go.
1.31.
So people were even getting nothing.
2.04.
There you go. And I'm not going to be surprised if that spikes to like 10% because, I mean, he was my point of difference going into head-to-head. I've started to see the chat on Mentors. I've started to see the chat around the place and the trends, and there's no point in me hiding him anymore. Like, he's just too good, and people are starting to take notice, which I love. I got to see BJ after the Titans-Manly game as he came out to the bus and shake hands and say, well done, mate. I said to him, mate, keep up your work rate that you've started the year with, mate. You're killing it for me in DT. And he sort of laughed and said, yeah, thanks, mate. No worries, will do. So, he's an absolute top bloke, and we love him at the Titans. Despite the fact he's now playing for Manly, we still love him and have a soft spot for him. And, he's one of those blokes. Get on him. If you're not on him, well, don't come crying to me at the end of the season when you get thrashed by someone who's got him.
Well, if you're not on him, it's cost you an extra 35 or so K to get on him this week. 35
exactly.
Yep.
And it'll cost you another probably 30K or so if you wait again next week. But,
yep.
You can only make 2 trades a week, so, whoever you need to prioritise into that.
Yeah. All right, boys. Well, let's move on now that we've revealed my point of difference in my head-to-head competition. Hopefully none of my opponents bother listening to our show, though I suspect they do just to have a good old-fashioned laugh at me, but that's all right. Butters, mate, the reason that you are here is, you've copped a bit of flack on the Mentors forums and that sort of thing for a lot of the content you post. And let me say straight up, any bloke who's willing to stick his neck out, who's willing to do the research and put things out there and present as much content as what you do, whether it's right or wrong, and it's not always right, it's not always wrong, I'm not always going to agree with it, I'm not always going to disagree with it, but the one thing I will always respect is there's always a lot of thought behind it, and you're willing to share that knowledge. So you've got my respect for that, barring whatever happens in the rest of this interview, and I know now you're probably sitting there on what the hell have I walked into. But I want to draw your attention back to a conversation that we had at probably about 2 to 3 weeks before the season started. And yeah. You were a very, very big exponent to me and pumping hard that this year is a change in the guard of DT. This is the year that we're going to see new guns emerge. The old guns are going to start to fall by the wayside, some of them spectacularly, and that where the team needs to be built from day dot is in a lot of that middle ground, that middle value. And you named players to me at the time. You named guys like Jamie Buhrer. There were a couple of others that sort of popped up and they don't immediately come to mind right now. So having now being 3 rounds in, and admittedly, look, 3 rounds is not the be-all and end-all, but I figure let's revisit this conversation, let's revisit the strategy and have a look at a little bit of your strategy, because right now I am sitting at position 1,993. Banksy, whereabouts are you?
I am 715.
Okay, so these are respectable places for us to. However, Butters, you, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe you're sitting at position 124. Is that right?
128, I think.
128. 124. There we go. So at position 124, it'd be safe to say with, obviously just a couple of minor tweaks, your strategy seems to be working pretty well at the start of the season. So
I'm feeling pretty good. Mate, and don't forget, I copped a heck of a lot of bagging especially on DT Fanatics page.
Yep.
I had a slow start, round 1, posted 697, was ranked over 10,000. Copped a hell of a bagging, but you know what? I really was not worried because I sat back and I looked at my squad and I looked at what was going on. There were a couple of low scores in there. There was a couple of players that scored lower than really what they probably are going to long term. And I spotted it straight away. I always knew that I was going to make 4 to 6 trades in the first 3 weeks, and I was happy with pretty much most of my squad and knew exactly what tweaks I wanted to make, who wanted to drop out, who wanted to bring in, but I was pretty happy. Things can swing around real quick. Round 2, 821, and I think I finished. I'm not trying to brag here or anything, but I was pretty happy finishing 11th for the week or something, I think.
As anybody should be too, by the way. I mean, that certainly does earn you some bragging rights, being 11th for the week out of 120,562 players. I think 11th for the week, earns you some rights.
Well, the thing I was happiest most about that week was there were players that I stayed off that a lot of people were talking about, and my looks at them, it just didn't stack up, and I stayed away from them. There were players that I thought would be really good value, and I went that way. And where I spent my money, I was really happy with where I spent my money. So that 697 round 1, 821 round 2 wasn't really the scores that I was most happy about. It was what I was actually seeing with players I stayed away from, players that I got on for value but left out of my 17 that other people were putting in their 17. And players standing up and putting the points on the board. Really frustrating week for me this week. It was looking so strong, as it often does come the end of Saturday night. And then I had Chris McQueen. The game didn't really seem to suit him too much on Sunday. And then coming into last night I actually had Gidley as for the entire round in my NPRs as an 18th man. And when he got pulled, I was just thinking, you beauty. Had Boyd and Bo Scott left to play as my last 2 plays with Gidley not even needed. And lo and behold, Bo Scott goes and gets injured first half and, cost me probably another 30 or so points for the round. But, I mean, even with those difficulties, the squad's actually held its own and managed to straggle over 800, and that was enough for me to climb up a few more ranks.
Yeah. Okay. So, looking at the squad, and I'm not going to reveal your entire squad. I mean, I know we're going to head-to-head, so we don't want to inadvertently.
I'm quite happy for you to discuss anybody in my squad whatsoever, because my take on that now is that if people want to sort of trade to my players, well, if you've got the same players as I've got, you're really not getting any advantage over me anyway. So,
well, yeah, that is a fair call.
People can look it up. People can look it up anyway.
But what I'm more interested in, rather than the actual players themselves, because look, to be perfectly honest with you, the squad. It looks like a strong squad, but take for example, we can look at say Chris McQueen. Somebody you've already mentioned. Chris McQueen is interchangeable with any one of probably 3 other players who are going to score around about that same amount. At about a similar sort of average. Chris McQueen is probably interchangeable with, say, a Mitchell Orbison, and I know Orbo has his own sort of faults and problems that come with him, but just for example's sake, Chris McQueen's averaging that 33, Orbo's averaging sort of in the 40s somewhere, so they're potentially interchangeable there. So there's the players that you're running with, while they're producing good scores, it's not the players that I'm interested in. What I really want to know is how you went about building the squad, what the strategy and the thinking behind building the squad was, and how you dragged yourself away from the old pre-2012 mentality of I must stack my second row forwards, I must stack my hookers, and everything else can be whatever it is.
Look, I've earned a target on my back on the Facebook world of DT over a number of years. I approach this thing very differently. I'm very analytical, very mathematical. I think people underestimate, though, that I'm a mad, passionate footy fan. So it's not statistics on their own. That does marry into my knowledge of footy. I think very much the last 3-4 years that I've been in DT have been a learning curve of applying that kind of mathematical approach at the same time as getting a feel for DT and the nuances of DT and all the rest of it. I don't think it's ever been that far off the mark, in all honesty. Now, the first year I played DT and brought a mathematical approach to it, I finished around 300 to 400. The first 3 years I've played DT, I've finished up around that 300 to 500 kind of range. Last year was a disaster year. That's behind us. I think a lot of players, good DT players, had a disaster year last year. Injuries, suspensions. It was just the first 8 weeks had a lot of us just scratching our heads and chasing our tail. But going back to the conversation we had, pre-season this year, I just sort of saw a complete changing of the guard. Hindmarsh retired. Parker losing goal kicking, probably highly likely to lose some minutes. Whether that was going to eventuate or not, didn't know. As it turns out, it has. I don't know if anyone's been watching the Broncos games. If you're on Scott Parker at the moment, you need to go back and watch some tape of the Broncos, because I'll tell you what, one of the things with, Corey Parker, CP13, one of the things with CP13 was his work rate in attack. He would take 2, sometimes 3 carries a set in attack. That's gone. You're lucky if he's taking one carry up every 2 sets at the moment. Griffin's got their props working their asses off. You watch the Broncos play, prop, hit up, prop, hit up, prop, hit up, prop, hit up. Parker's work rate there's been cut. And that's affecting his points as much as any time on the bench and as much as any goal kicking. I move on to Paul Gallen. It was no secret that Paul Gallen was looking at having his career extended by not being forced to play 80 minutes every game.
Yeah, and I mean Flanagan came out sort of towards the end of last season or sort of in the off season and said Gallen will be spending more time on the bench in 2013 because they want him to be there at the end. I mean, if you look at the dismal finals campaign of the Sharks, and I mean it was great that they made the finals, but they literally limped into the finals. You know, Carney, 60 minutes into that semi-final, Carney blew his Achilles, and Gallen just couldn't keep going. You know, like, and that's what Flano's trying to avoid. And he openly said that. He said, look, I do not want to limp into the finals again. We're going to play finals football, but we're going to do it with a full-strength squad with plenty of depth and our players feeling as fresh as they possibly can in September, rather than having them limp into the finals feeling like they've just sort of traipsed no man's land between trenches in the middle of France.
Yeah, but then look at their, I mean, that's one side of the coin. The other side of the coin, look at their purchases. I mean, last year they had Wade Graham, they had Paul Gallen, they had Jason Bakaya, they had Bakuya. Was Jeremy Smith was there last year?
No, yeah, Jeremy Smith. He's moved to Newcastle. Yeah, he's now at Newcastle this year.
So they've let Jeremy Smith go. They've replaced him with both Luke Lewis and Chris Heinington.
Yeah.
I mean, you look at the depth, and there's still Anthony Tupou there that we haven't even mentioned yet. You look at the depth they've got in their back row. That's very, very, very evident that there's no need for Paul Gallen to be playing 80 minutes.
Yeah, and especially with Wade Graham, like the surprise packet out of that Sharks pack for me this year hasn't been any of the big names. It's Wade Graham from a DT perspective. The kid's just flogging it.
Yeah, and I think the suck-in was round 1. All this Asada stuff, Cronulla were playing on emotion. Gallen standing in the club, he probably put his foot down and said, "Do not dare pull me off this field today," and he went out there and smashed it. But that's the 1 week. That's the 1 week wonder in my book. That is a situation specific to what was going on with the Asada stuff and all the rest of it, and now they're moving on to their normal business of football for the year, and that doesn't include Gallen smashing out 80 minutes a game.
Yeah, absolutely. And moving on, like looking at Sean Fensom, seeing as we are sort of looking at the guns, you know, David Furner's always loved to play musical minutes with Fensom, particularly at the beginning of the season, which is why, in the end, as much as I sort of wanted Fensom, you know, I had this horrible gut feeling saying I have to have one gun in my second row forward. But, you know, the musical minutes thing was in the back of my mind. Fensom's coming back from injury again. He's got this niggle. He's going to play through it and all the rest of it. And if you saw him in the Titans game, you saw him in the game against St. George. That bicep of his, I think it's his left bicep, or, you know, it's strapped like you wouldn't freaking believe. I haven't seen
And he
strapping on
injured
a
it last
player's
year
arm.
as well.
Yeah, well, that's
He
it.
injured it last year as well.
This is an ongoing thing. And I haven't seen strapping on a player's arm like that since Scotty Prince came back from shattering his forearm, and he had the phone book on his forearm, if you guys all remember that. You know, like,
Yeah.
Feno's not right, and he will pump out the 50-point scores here and there, and he'll probably average that 40 to 45. But I have to put him in that category of being a potential injury risk and being out for a long time, because, you know, we've already seen Lachlan Coote strip a bicep, Keith Galloway strip a bicep or pec. You know, how long is it before Fensom's in the exact same boat? How often can he have pain-killing injections before he does some very, very serious damage? The guy's playing with an injury.
Well, my thinking on Fensom was different to the case with Parker and Gallen coming through pre-season.
Mm-hmm.
Parker to me was, there's no way he's going to hold his value. There's no way he's going to hold his average from last year. I'm not going near it, not at that price.
Yeah.
Gallen, same situation. Fensom, who knows? Who knows? Maybe he will, maybe he won't, but at that price he's not going to go up much.
Yeah.
And he could potentially drop quite a bit. Now, you asked me what my thinking was coming into my squad, and, you know, here's the thing. My approach to DT has never, ever been this recipe that just seems to be followed, and I don't say this to offend anybody or to raise any hackles, but there does seem to be this recipe that people follow in DT of get as many guns into your team as you can. If that means you end up buying 5 bottom price players that aren't even starting the year, so be it. And then if you need to fill in your squad with some value players like Nathan Smith, then do that to get over the line, to get as many of these guns into your team as you can. Now, that's kind of gone a bit weird this year as well, because a lot of people are still getting on. I mean, I know this one guy that actually has a back row of Parker plus Gallen plus Fensom, which to me is just ridiculous. But a lot of people have actually realised that those guns aren't quite going to fire to that level, but they've switched to other guns. So we're seeing a lot of people putting big money into Hayne plus Inglis plus Parker, or Hayne plus Inglis plus Fensom. But at the end of the day, you're making a lot of sacrifices to do that. I've always had the mentality that there's a stock exchange element to Dream Team, that a large part of it is growing your squad's value, and the more value you can grow, the more guns you can get later. I've always fallen down in the past on the trading side, and you know, it's been a learning curve, so I'm pretty confident that I've learned a lot over the last 4 years, and a lot of that's going to come through in how I go about things this year. But my thinking at the beginning of this season was, you know what, there are only so many guns that there are only so many 360k or even 400k plus players that you can bring into your squad without leaving your squad weak or without impacting the cash potential of your squad. So my attitude was, you know what, I'm going to look at all of these so-called guns, and I'm going to consider them in terms of value, in terms of how dangerous are they of not making that money, and how likely are they to either hold that money or grow that money. And when I did that, well, Cam Smith is the golden rule of Dream Team, so he was already a lock. The next picked player was Robbie Farah. The next picked player after that was Trent Merrin.
Yeah.
I'm very, very happy with both those picks. The only other player in my squad that I came into round 1 that was worth over 300,000 was James Maloney at 360.
Yeah.
Now, I'm still a big James Maloney fan. I traded him out in round 2, but I traded him out for strategic reasons. I have no doubt that I'll be trading him back in before we hit about round 10. I think with the recruiting that the Roosters have done, they are going to fire. They're going to fire hard. I think they're going to finish probably third on the ladder, and I think he's going to average well above his price.
I reckon you're way off there, mate. I reckon that they'll scrape into the 8. I think it's going to take them a season to get, to be finishing top 4.
That's something that only time's going to tell. We're both going to have a different read on that one.
Well, what I'm basing it off, if you look at Melbourne, you look at Manly, you look at the Titans, who are currently being in the media. By the way, as a Titans fan, I love the fact the media are finally paying attention to my team and praising them. I'm paying positive attention to my team. I've always paid attention, but always like to bag us. But what at the same time, it's bittersweet because I don't want them paying attention to my team. I don't want other teams to see us coming. We know we've got a good squad this year, but what they're saying in the media at the moment is the Titans, the way that they're playing their footy and defending and getting into that arm wrestle is up there with the Manlys and Melbournes of this world. And that's where I'm sort of basing it on. Looking at the Roosters, look, defensively against the Broncos, they were great, but the Broncos in attack have not been crash hot. So it's that defensive game. You look at the Roosters versus the Rabbitohs, and the Rabbitohs, put points on them, at various points there. So they don't have that defensive siege mentality just yet. And I think that takes a year. I know for us at the Titans, it took a couple of years. The boys had to take home a wooden spoon, unfortunately. They had to then fight back from that with a couple of new recruits and bond as a team, and then spend another off-season sort of really gelling together with Dave Taylor coming in as well, and who's the only sort of new recruit on top of that team last year. And I think it's going to take them that year with their new recruits. And I hope Sonny Bill stays on, as I said at the top of the show. I hope he stays on.
Yeah, look, that's something that only time's going to tell. But you know what? I think the Roosters this year, there's going to be a lot of similarity to that freak year that they had. They went from wooden spoon to grand finalist with Carney turning up. Yeah. This year they've got Maloney turning up. They've got Sonny Bill Williams turning up. They've got Jennings turning up. They've got a lot of strike power there. And if that strike power gels, they're going to be a very, very good side. But I mean, that's kind of digressing from the conversation we're having.
From Dreamteam.
We'll see how the Roosters go over the rest of the year.
All right.
I guess
but as what I'll do, mate, rather than keep going, because we do have to move on to new segments, but there is one thing I do want to quickly mention. You were talking about you're looking at value, and you decided you were going to go for value in these players and look at who was likely to drop and who was likely to keep their spot. Now, I know from my conversations with you that you've actually worked out, I guess, a price coefficient, as in, this is what it's costing me per point to have this player. And this is one of the tools that you use in order to work out what players were actually going to present value compared to the expected points that you thought that they were capable of. How is that factored into your selection process?
Mate, it's for a round one squad, it's everything. It is absolutely everything. And I think, I've learned enough over the last few years that it's starting to all kind of get some synergy in it. And I'm really happy with the way it's going. The math of it's really, really simple. We all have $5.8 million to spend. Yeah. Simple. Okay? The bottom line is the more points you can get for less dollars on a player, then the more money you have left over to buy more points on another player.
Yeah. And that's, I think that's a perfect spot to sort of end there. We're going to jump into plenty of other stuff where, we're going to keep you around because Matt Harvey was unable to rock up, so you're going to be co-hosting for the rest of the show with us, but we do need to move on. But as, before we do get on to the rest of the show, I just want to say thanks for coming on and giving us some insight into your strategy. I know that no doubt you're going to cop a lot of stick on the forums and that sort of thing for your strategy, but hey, look, at sitting at position 124 after round 3, I think there's a little bit of merit in there that, the people who are giving you stick.
It's a long year. We'll see how it pans out.
That's it. But the people giving you stick at the moment, mate, they better be positioned higher. I can tell you that much. Alrighty, let's move on. Banksy, mate, any thoughts on what Butters had to say on his strategy there before we jump in to our next segment?
I think that's actually he's got very valid points there. Like you got to find those value picks. And so I'm going back to your secret gun in Lawrence, that he was that great value pick, averaging over 1.1 points a minute at the Titans, coming to an understrength Manly forward pack, especially in the forwards with old props here. You got to be thinking he's going to get 40, 45 minutes a game each week. That's going to give him 45, 50 points a week.
And that's
if he gets 45 points, he's going to make 54.
Yeah.
If he gets 45 minutes, he's going to make 55.
He's going to make 54, 55, that's it. And this is, you know, you've touched on a brilliant point there, Banksy, in that people give Butters a lot of shit for you know, being so stats-orientated and mathematical about it and things like that. And it's not just that. It's the same as me. I mean, when I was ex-Renegades, my nickname was Moneyball, you know, like, because I was so stats orientated, and I still am. You know, I tend to use the points per minute as one of my key factors, but the stats alone aren't enough. You know, you can have all of the stats in the NRL and Dreamteam as much as you like, but Banksy, what you've just touched on, what Butters touched on during the interview, and I think is absolutely vital, you've got to have your finger on the pulse. There was no point me grabbing BJ Lawrence, knowing that he was a 1.14 per minute player. If
you're also looking at his average minutes from the Titans.
Well, that's it. But not only that, knowing that you know, not even taking into account his minutes. You know, it's all well, if he gets 15 minutes on field, like we've had some players this year who have gotten 3 minutes a game. 3 minutes a game. Now, you can be scoring at 2 points per minute, and 3 minutes a game is not going to help you. And that's exactly the same in the situation with BJ. I knew he was going to Manly. I knew he'd signed on a top tier, as in first tier contract, so he wasn't going there to play SG ball or New South Wales Cup for them. He was going there to be in the starting 17 or to earn his spot in the starting 17. Jason King out injured meant that, you know, BJ Lawrence was going to be a starter rather than coming off the bench. So you add all those things together, you add that inside knowledge. And look, I'll be the first to admit, to get that information on BJ, particularly what he was doing at Manly, how he's performing and how he was thought of at Manly, I had to do some things I'm just not proud of. For starters, I had to talk to diehard Manly fans, you know, and none of us like doing that. So, you know, it's not just the stats, it's not just the maths. You know, the maths gives you that really good base. The maths, probably more than anything, alerts the players and gives you a short list of the players for you to be checking out and to be shortlisting, if you will. And then you go and you get that extra info. You find out who is and who isn't going to be doing, you know, these amazing things. It's one of the reasons I was able to avoid Justin Horro, because I knew he was going to be getting plenty of time at Manly. But I also knew that the guy doesn't do anything, even if you gave him 160 minutes a game. He's still not going to score, you know, all that much. So it's these things that all combine to allow you to pick the good buys to get inside. And I think that's probably the key point. Can I chip in on two
players here?
Yeah, go for it.
Look, two players, I know I've copped a lot of flack from my mathematical side. I think people do underappreciate or under-respect, however, that I do actually have footy knowledge and I do actually dig beneath. So I'm going to go with one player that I picked, even though it's been a bit of an unlucky pick for me this week, and one player that I avoided. Firstly, the player I avoided, Darcy Lussick. There was so much talk about Darcy Lussick at the beginning of the season. But you know what? Leopards don't change their spots. Forwards play however they play. Rennie Matul is another classic example. Rennie Matul's defensive work rate, it's mud. Everyone was thinking, okay, well, you know, he's going to have to do all Hindy's tackles. Well, most of Hindy's tackles were second man, third man in. A Leopard doesn't change his spots. That's just not the case. Darcy Lussick, his points per minute's not that great. And people were somehow making this assumption that the move to Parramatta would mean that he got more minutes. I don't think many people stopped and actually did the research on how many minutes he was getting. He was getting 37 minutes a game at Manly. You can't be thinking that he's going to be suddenly part-time playing 60 minutes a game at Parramatta. I
mean, and you can expect that he's going to be getting 45 minutes a game. But it's interesting you bring up Lussick, because Lussick's one that I did look at, and at one point, you know, I had him in my squad and that. And there was a lot of chatter about him. There was a lot of chatter. And Banksy, I'd love your input on this as well. When I looked at Lussick, the thing that made me drop him like a hot potato was Darcy Lussick is terrible for errors and penalties.
He's a grub, complete grub.
He is terrible for it. And it wasn't the fact he wasn't doing the workload. It's the fact that he'd undo all his good work with two penalties a game and 2 to 3 errors a game. And I know that Sticky will improve that. But, you know, you can't, I just wasn't willing to spend the money. And I know he was valued, but I wasn't willing to even spend under 200 grand on a bloke who is going to work his ass off, and then I'm going to have to watch him go backwards as he commits a penalty here and drops a ball here. And that was my thing for Lussick. Banksy, was there anything there you wanted to add to that, mate? I know you've been quiet. Butters and I are sort of dominating here, but anything for you to add, mate?
No, I was just want to add on to Lussick, because it's just like I was looking at him too, and I looked at his points per minute. It's just like, this is crap. Like, why would I want to fork up that much money for him anyway? It's like, if I'm going to take a risk on a player, I'd rather risk Lewis Brown, but I didn't even risk either of them. Ended up risking Coro, and he went second week to Sonny Bill. So
yeah, no, fair enough. And look, for those of you listening, you know, you'd all be familiar with the points per minute. I know that Butters, myself, Banksy, you know, we regularly do talk points per minute when we're talking in posts and we're offering stats as a backup for something. If you want to work out a player's points per minute, all you've got to do is take the number of points he scored and divide that by the number of minutes that he's you know, been on the field. You can get the minutes from NRL.com, you can get them from NRL stats, and of course the points, you know, particularly for this season, you can get them from your dream team assistant coach, and from, you know, your previous sort of team history of what they've scored. NRL stats, there are a few spreadsheets that are floating around and that sort of thing, so you can get points per minute for last year and that, although 3 rounds in, last year's stats are now fairly much, you know, a non-issue. They're not really have any relevance whatsoever in the new season now that we've got some stats from the new season.
The other player I wanted to mention, mate, was, and this has been one of the most controversial selections I've had of the season so far. Guy coming into this round was owned by 3.95% of teams. Really, really unlucky with him last night. Player's name, Bo Scott.
Yep.
Now, what I'm going to tell you here comes down to, back to this point of, it's not just stats, it's actually doing your homework.
Yeah.
Now, Bo Scott moved from the Dragons to the Knights this year. Jeremy Smith moved from the Dragons to the Knights this year. There was talk about... Sorry, Sharks to the Knights. There was talk about Jeremy Smith, Bo Scott, you know, a lot of people thought that Jeremy Smith was going to play back row, Bo Scott would play lock, and thought that Jeremy Smith was going to be pretty good value. You know? I did my homework there. You know, I know that both of those players played under Bennett at Dragon at St George when they won the premiership. You know, that got me to look back to, okay, well, hang on, Bennett's had both of these guys before. He's used both of these guys before. Now he's bought both of these guys again. What are Bennett's thoughts on who these players are? So I backtracked to 2010 and started having a look at the 2010 season and 2010 stats. Jeremy Smith was injured through the middle of it. Over the back third of that competition coming into their grand final win, the stats really stood out. Bo Scott was playing back row 80 minutes. Jeremy Smith was playing lock 55. That led me to looking at, okay, well, hang on, are there any patterns to how Bennett actually runs his forwards? And I started digging into that for last season and the season before, and something really, really interesting came out. And I tried to share this on the mentors page. Don't know if anyone caught it or not. Don't know if anyone believes it or not. Don't know if anyone wants to believe it going forward or not. But I can tell you, if you have a look at the way Bennett runs his forwards, one thing stands out. He plays both his back rowers 80 minutes every game, and he plays his primary lock about 50 to 55 minutes every game, religiously. Doesn't matter who the player is. When they had injuries in the night squad last year and Robbie Rockhow came in, Robbie Rockhow started back row, played 80 minutes. He just does it all the time. All the time. So if I can tell you now, if Scott's out for any length of time, you can bet your bottom dollar that whoever's taking that back row spot is going to play 80 minutes. Whether they're going to be value in that spot, depending on their work rate and points per minute productivity, don't know. That's something I haven't looked at yet. But I can guarantee you that he'll play his back rowers 80 minutes because he does it week in, week out. He's been doing it for years.
And that's a valid point, and I mean that comes down to doing your research and having your finger on the pulse. And I used the exact same thinking with Aaron Woods last year when the Tigers lost a couple of their props. I had a look at exactly how they were playing their starting props, and Tim Sheens, he a very similar mould. He was running his starting props for I think it was 47 and 50 minutes each, depending on whether they were in the 8 or the 10. And it was a consistent pattern over the last few years. Aaron Woods was coming in to start in that starting prop lineup. I knew in 2011, despite coming off the bench, he scored at 0.98 points per minute. So bang, straight in. So using that knowledge,